minutes away. Monday to Friday at 12:30 p.m. only on Bloomberg Quint.
Hello and welcome to Bloomberg Quint. You're watching the fine print. India's over 1.7 million companies have been given 2 months to show that they're alive. As a proof of that, they have to give records of registered office, its latitude and longitude, external and inside photograph of the office with the director in it, statutory and cost auditors' details. The intent and end goal of this exercise has not been made clear by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which notified this new form on Friday evening. So joining me to decode that are Pratibha Jain from Nishith Desai Associates and Sharad Abhyankar from Khaitan. Welcome to the fine print, both of you. Sharad, very quickly, any company which has been incorporated prior to December 2017 needs to make this disclosure. Before I come to the details of, how to go about it, what do you see as the intent of this new form?
So, if you see the regulation that is being formed, it is claimed to have been framed under Section 12(9). Now, if you look at Section 12(9), it actually says if the registrar has a reasonable cause to believe that the company is not in operation, the registrar is expected to prescribe the manner in which the physical verification of a registered office can take place. Now, usually the normal jurisprudence is that reasonable cause is being formed through a positive evidence rather than a negative evidence. So, instead of going after and framing rules for the companies where there is a reason to believe how the physical verification will happen, we have actually reversed the process and created a sort of a negative evidence to say that if you have not filed this form, then you are deemed to be not in operation. So that seems to be very strange in terms of even framing of the regulations.
Okay, because currently the ROCs, are they not equipped with data already to figure out what companies are active and what companies are not active?
So there is some data available, but in terms of actual filings, I think they're just trying to link up the dots to make sure that the companies are actually in operation.
Yeah, because look, I know they've said it's a one-time filing, but it's almost saying like, hey, look, we can't figure out for these million companies whether they're alive or not. So let's bring in all this data. Let's get, more sort of compliance get going, and then use that as a proof to figure out whether they're alive or not.
So it is not the effort of actually trying to find out who is alive. It's a deductive logic to say that if you have not filed, we have a presumption to believe that you are not in operation.
Sure.
So that's where actually the section and the rules are not in sync.
Okay. All right. Pratibha, have you been able to figure out what is the end goal of this exercise?
So, all we can understand is, again, they've been focusing on shell companies for a while. Earlier, they had tried to restrict it by saying you can only have 2 layers of companies in India. They keep tightening the rules to try and ensure that these companies are not being used for money laundering. So the focus for a while has been to figure out, what is the misuse and how it's being taking place. So it seems like this is just another aspect of trying to ensure that they try and figure out which are actual companies and which are just being used for creating structures for avoiding tax or for money laundering.
Okay, so let me take this argument of, it's all being done for the noble cause of, identifying shell companies, Pratibha. Fit this puzzle for me. What in this form will indicate to the ROC that a company is a shell company versus not?
That's a very good question. I think, what to us came as a surprise was this requirement to provide a photograph of the office inside and outside with a KMP or a director inside. Because the concept of a registered office is different from a concept of a corporate office. Now, in most developing jurisdictions, you will have the concept of a registered office which doesn't need to be a physical space. They've gone to a further extent of a physical space where your director or your KMP is sitting, i.e., you are not a shell company, which is if somebody wants to circumvent that, they will just provide a photograph, provide a name, and move on. So again, I think the importance is enforcement, because they've taken data before. What they've done with it is the question. How are they actually enforcing these laws rather than just asking for compliance after compliance, which whoever wants to circumvent will circumvent, but becomes a burden for companies who are actually trying to do business in a very legal and compliant manner.
Sure. I take your point on enforcement, Pratibha, and we'll come to that. But Sharad, I do want to get your view on the really intent of, this compliance requirement. The details that we have, spelled out in terms of what needs to be disclosed. How does that take you or lead you to figuring out that a company is a shell company?
If you look at the forms, they have some very interesting content. So, and that's why the name that they're trying to tag a few things around the operating companies sounds quite logical, because this is a sort of an indirect compulsion of compliance. So if you look at the form, it says that not only identify the directors, identify your secretary, identify your auditor, identify your cost auditor. Now when you are actually doing that, and if you have not done that compliance of, even say for example, having a paid up capital more than 5 crores but not having a company secretary, because some of these fields are pre-fill, unless the company has been able to show a compliance of those regulations, they will be incapable of filing this form.
No,
So
which is all fine. Which is all fine.
Which is very, silently ensuring that all the companies who want to be in operation, who are in operation, are compliant not only of the registered office requirement, but of many other regulations which have been observed to be non-compliant.
Okay, I'm sorry to belabor this on this point, but I don't know what is the definition of shell company, because nobody has defined it for us. That is one.
Yeah.
And two, just because I filed this form, does it automatically imply that I'm not a shell company?
At least there is a deeming presumption that you are in operation because you would have filed. So if you look at the form, it says that the accounts for 17-18 is the reference point for filing of this form. So if a company has actually filed a 17-18 accounts and annual return, surely it should have been in operation.
Sure, and that should be an indication enough for the MCA that I'm not a shell company.
Right. So it is also not clear as to whether the companies who have a past non-compliance but possibly a compliance for accounts and return for this year, will they be able to upload the form? We don't know. I mean, unless somebody attempts really that.
Sorry, I didn't catch this point.
So if you look at the form,
right,
it refers to the SRN of filing of the accounts and filing of the annual return only for FY 17-18.
Correct.
It does not say that you have been, the rules talk about if you are a non-compliant company, then clearly you are not eligible and your ability to file this form will be restricted.
Sure.
So the only reference point that we are looking at is a 17-18 compliance and not really a prior non-compliance.
So if I have not done, let's say, a return of 16-17 or 15-16, but have done it in 16-17, I should be able to file this form.
Well, that's what the fields indicate.
Okay. Pratibha, weigh in here on, again, does it seem logical that all these details will take me to a clear understanding of whether, a clear conclusion of whether a company is a shell company or not? That is one. And two, why this cutoff of December 2017? What's the logic or potential logic for that?
Okay, so the logic for the cutoff is basically just the previous financial year. So anybody who's post December 2017, they wouldn't have completed their financial year under the Companies Act. So that's fine, because that'll be March 31st, 2019. But in terms of, firstly, shell company itself, right? Is it a bad word? You could have companies that are holding companies which don't have business but will have auditors, will have all other compliances, for example, right? I think that we are talking about companies created for the purposes of subverting laws, various aspects of it. This at most might help you consolidate data which you would look at for determining whether or not, it is meeting any of those criteria. Because this information is, as you said, available to them anyhow. If a company is filing, it's making all its filings, all of this information will be available in some form or the other than this new requirement of a photograph of the internal and external offices. Everything else is available with them anyhow.
Okay, excellent. You've touched upon also a point that I wanted to talk about. What is the purpose of this photograph? I can have, let's say, 10 companies registered to one address. So is the director supposed to, take picture in different corners of the office and then, tag it to those as many companies?
Or, it's not uncommon for service providers. Let's say I am a foreign company coming into India. I'm still looking for a lease, but I want to get the process of registration of my company done. It's not uncommon for service providers who provide all the services, including leases, also providing their registered office till the time you set up your corporate office. So are we saying now that can't be done? Or the director or the KMP should go and photograph there, or should be from the same organization? There is no requirement the only requirement today in law is that the register office should be an active office in terms of being able to take your correspondences, etc. Right? That's why you have a difference between registered office and a corporate office. So the purpose of taking picture of the physical location of a registered office is then you're introducing a new element in law saying even your registered office should be a physical space where your director or your KMP sits. That's the only deduction I can make.
Okay, Sharad, what sort of challenges do you foresee in complying with this now?
So one is the physical office. I think Pratibha had absolutely a point bang on dot. That is there then a legal expectation to have a physical registered office and not have a virtual office where it could be just a registered office address? I think what is more important is also the history that there have been companies which are found vanishing. And instead of a registered office, you either find a completely vacant plot or sort of a cowshed. I think it is more geared to ensure that the promoters and the KMPs or directors are compelled to show what is the physical environment which is portrayed to be a registered office. So while
the magic is called Photoshop.
Well, but okay, I think the point is right, but somebody other than really the directors or KMPs who sign this form, there is somebody else who is made to verify. And if you look at the undertaking that the PCS files, that undertaking is very strongly worded. I have gone through the provisions of the Companies Act and rules thereunder on the subject matter of this form, and I have verified above particulars including attachments from the original records maintained by the company or the applicant, which is the subject matter of this form, and found them true, correct and complete.
Who's going to give this undertaking?
This is required to be done by a practicing company secretary while filing the form. Okay. So I think there is now creating a dual level of responsibility, that it's not just the company but also somebody who is authenticating this form is required to do a physical verification of multiple things. So which I think in terms of record building is good, because then you clearly have specific individuals who will have to take the responsibility.
Also spelled out a few consequences if you don't file this form. You can be removed from the registrar of companies' roles. You won't be able to do any other compliance filing. For instance, if you're authorized capital or paid up capital, if there are changes to it, or if you're undergoing a demerger or an amalgamation as a company, that can't get recorded, or if there are director details that you need to change, all of that can't happen unless you file this form. Also, there is a penalty of 10,000 rupees if you file this information after the due date, which is in April. Can you do all of this through rules?
Okay. So let's talk about that first. I'll go in the reverse sequence. Is this a penalty? Well, they have named it a fee, and that's how they have structured it within the rules. The penal provisions continue to stand. So if there is a filing date of 25th April and there is a delay, 12(8) already talks about a per day penalty subject to 1 lakh. So that stands. That's without prejudice to the compliance. 12(9), the rule specifically call it a fee. So it's a without a fee, you are able to file it up to 25th April. With fee and possibly penalty, which is a per day penalty, the companies will be able to file it even after 26th of April. In terms of consequence, I think the non-compliance only makes that company a non-compliant kind of a tag which is created for the company, and certain major actions like change of capital, changes in directorships, apart from the cessation of directorship. So you will not be able to report these major events. Now what that makes it really very difficult for a company is without filing, these actions can't be put into final implementation. So to that extent,
but
the company
through rules, can you prevent me from doing something which probably the principal or the mother-in-law allows me to do?
So the filing is, so this is like a proof of your existence.
Sure.
I mean, if I were to compare that with the kind of certification that the pensioners file every month, stating virtually that the doctors have examined and I am alive, this seems to be that kind of a, but I mean, with all credit, it is a one-time certification. So I'm sure it will weed out a lot of companies which are otherwise non-compliant. Through this exercise, I'm sure there will be a big negative list that they will be able to generate.
Okay, all right. Pratibha, we have, all these compliance forms to apparently target shell companies, but which has not been defined, like I earlier said. Now, in this case, it's also unclear to what extent the registrar of companies can oversee this. Do you believe that while the compliance requirement for companies is going up on a variety of, through a variety of forms, there isn't as much success with enforcement?
So that's really the problem with our implementation of these laws currently, right? We keep coming up with forms after forms. Who want to evade it will, like you said, Photoshop it. And others, compliance costs keeps increasing. ROC has limited bandwidth. In fact, for any of our companies where we find a non-violation, we go compound voluntarily. Hardly ever ROC comes after you. So, I mean, we definitely have a bandwidth issue in terms of going after companies that are filling in the information, then looking at the quality of information and deducing something out of it. That is the crucial factor, right? Otherwise, this is a one-time, then again we'll have it next year, etc., without any outcome coming out of it. So that's where I see a fundamental flaw. You've asked us to fill in information. Some companies will bend backwards to fill in the information. Others will just fill something in. Is there anybody at ROC seeing the quality of data and determining, and trying to figure out which one is genuine and which one is not?
All right. Though sorry, Sharad, you want to say something?
Just taking the Pratibha's point forward, I think one is clearly identifying a negative list which will be really a target for the ROCs to see that why are you not compliant, and therefore is that a reason to believe that you are not really in operation. So
but
at least
I can give all these, wait 1 second, I can give all these details, right, and be in the group that is compliant. Then the ROC can't do anything about it. I mean, because these individual sets of information anyway doesn't prove what kind of activities my company is undertaking, right? So I can very well come in the system and prove to the ROC that, hey, I'm very well alive, and then ensure that I'm not then targeted.
Okay. So what the rules also say that if you have been non-compliant in the past, say for at least on 2 items, accounts and returns, you will not be able to file this form. So one is your ability to file this form of your continuing operations itself is restricted.
Okay.
So clearly they are trying to use a combination of technology and compliance to make sure that at least they are able to identify a very clear list of companies which are non-compliant.
So then I have to first file my accounts and return and then get to this
Then
form.
get to the point of filing this active.
All right, maybe in a few months from now, if at all the ROCs, ask you all questions, we'll be able to figure out the noble goal of this new compliance requirement for India Inc. Pratibha, Sharad, thank you for joining us here on The Fine Print, and thank you so much for watching.